Is this the real thing?
Yeah.
Dies Marív agus Fáilteroibh go LTV. Good evening and welcome to LTV for another chapter in our series of A Story That Should Be Told. The title of today's programme is To Have Life and to Have It to the Full. This evening's edition of A Story That Should Be Told relates to Father Pat O'Connell, a native of the parish of Ahina, who has spent his life and energy in the service of the people of the Diocese of Hexham and Newcastle, in the Newcastle and Gateshead conurbation area of England. In that place, he has done and is doing everything that he can to ensure that everyone in his parish would have life and have it to the full. Father Pat O'Connell, Fáilteroid, you're very welcome.
Good evening, Margaret.
Father Pat, I would like to begin by briefly telling our viewers a little about yourself, your place of birth, family and early days.
Right. Well, many moons ago, I won't give all the story. Many moons ago, I was born in Clonrick, Macroom, in the parish of Ahina, as you already said. And then I grew up and went to Rasheen School, national school. After that, I went to the brothers in Macroom, the LaSalle brothers, the LaSalle College. And then, having done my leaving cert in the 50s, I entered St. John's College, Waterford, to study for the priesthood. I was ordained a priest in June 1962. And then, after 5 or 6 weeks holiday, I went out to England, to the Diocese of Hexham and Newcastle, in the northeast of England. The diocese comprises of two of the old counties, Northumberland and Durham. And then I was appointed to a mining village called Ashington. You may have heard of it already because that was the home of the Charltons.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, you may remember Jack
And
Charlton.
Baba, yes.
Saint Jack, who did so well with the Irish team. And that was a mining village, and around that mining village there would be about 5 or 6 collieries, mines, and that was the source form of work for the people, the main form of work, miners. And they were the salt of the earth, and of course very nice people. And I was there for just over 6 years. And I was moved in, a big jump down to the other end of the diocese, to a place called Billingham, a big RCIA stronghold, chemical place. I was there for 5 years. And in 1973, I was moved up to Newcastle, up to the city, just at the outskirts of the city, as a curate again, assistant. We equate curacy, being a curate as an assistant priest, same thing, for another 7 years. And in 1980, I was appointed parish priest in the city, the west end of Newcastle, a place called Benwell. I was there until I was moved in 1995 across the Tyne, which separates, actually the Tyne separates the city of Newcastle from Gateshead. This is all the total conurbation of Newcastle and Gateshead. And I was there until I retired, forcibly I would say, through ill health in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still helping out there, supplying, because there's a need of a priest like that, because, you have, for example, priests with the decrease in the number of priests, the numbers falling. You have one priest to 2 parishes, or maybe 3. We say that after 50 years, I noticed a big change. When I went out first, in many parishes there were 3 priests. So you could say to 3 priests to 1 parish. Now it is 1 priest to 3 parishes.
Yes.
In that kind of way, if you want to, it isn't.
Yes.
Of course, completely.
The situation has changed dramatically,
It has indeed, yes.
And the equation changed with it. Now, the focus of this series of programmes is on illustrating the commitment and effort of individual Catholics who devote their lifetime to bringing happiness and goodness and kindness to the lives of all people. And this evening, Father Pat will focus on the work that he has done in the course of his lifetime as a Catholic priest since his ordination 53 years ago in 1962. Now, Father Pat, in our preparation last week for this program and in trying to identify a context in which to base your work, you quoted the words of Jesus in which he gave the reason for his coming. Now, that was in response to a question that I asked you, what was the reason for you being a priest? And you quoted the words that Jesus said for his coming on earth. And the words were, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. It forms the title of today's program. And Father Pat, I would like you to elaborate on those words, please.
Yes, I will try, probably very inadequately, but I'll do my best. Life in all its aspects, not just the spiritual, but the physical, the mental, the emotional, in all its aspects, to try and do what Christ said, why he came among us. One does that in many ways, of course, in the life of a priest. There's quite a lot of work. There's a variety of work, offering Mass. But prayer is at the basis of it, of course. And the greatest prayer of all, of course, is Holy Mass, the sacrifice of Holy Mass. Then giving the sacraments to the people, And there are other jobs that come in between, preparing people for the sacraments, actually, for baptism, confirmation, Holy Eucharist, marriage, and then, of course, the sacrament of the sick, when we go on a sick call, for example. In most parishes, there's a hospital. So I was chaplain to the hospital in my first parish, and you would go there. Those days were a bit, I suppose, different from now, because it was pre-Vatican II. Vatican Council took place in the 60s, of course, just after I had been ordained. And before the whole Vatican Council was promulgated, we had Mass in Latin, of course, and then you would go out in the morning. That was the only time you could take communion to the sick in hospital. We had no extraordinary ministers then either. You'd go to the hospital perhaps at 7 o'clock in the morning, because it was still fasting from midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And go out on the bicycle in the cold morning. I was on a bicycle for starters until about 3 years I was there, and then I drove a car. But however, we'd go out and and hail, rain and snow, so to speak. I was only about a quarter of a mile from the hospital, really. And then there's hospital work, there's school work, of course. There's in those days too, the primary school, the age was up to about 14 or 15 or something like that. And so that was the school. But then as time went on, we changed from the schooling, the whole education thing changed. At 11, about the age of 11, people would go to grammar school or a secondary modern school, as the case may be. There was an exam called the 11 plus. If you did that, it was equivalent, I suppose, to the primary certificate here. If you got the 11 plus, you would go to grammar school. If you got if you didn't, of course, you would go to a secondary modern school. So there's that distinction. Now, of course, it's all called comprehensive education now. There's no 11 plus examination.
Okay. Just before we continue maybe with the other areas of your ministry, I just want to comment again on your context, to have life and to have it to the full. And in particular, your explanation of it there, that it encompasses the totality of life,
That's
spiritual
exactly.
and naturally physical welfare, etc. And happiness, of course, as well. But I'm mindful that is quite a different concept to the concept that many of us had been given, or that we interpreted when we were children in school, because at that time, religion seemed to be tied up an awful lot with sins, and so you had venial sins and mortal sins, and it was so important to have them confessed. And then there was hell. Of course, there was a lot of emphasis on hell and burning for all eternity. And then somebody came up with the idea, the very notion, that St. Peter was busily above recording in his book all the devilment and the various things we got up to. Now, it was interesting to note that nobody said he was recording the good things, only the bad things. So, thankfully, that has changed, and I'm assuming that you probably had that interpretation as a child
yes,
yourself in school, and are you happy that it's gone?
when we grow up, let's say, well, it hasn't gone completely, but I mean, there's different emphasis on different things, and it's put across differently. There's more a positive attitude, and
Yes.
we talk more about the love of God, rather than offending God, We do still offend God, of course, there is sin still there, but of course, a lot of the secular world has lost the notion of sin.
Okay.
And they would love to forget about it altogether.
Okay.
They'd love to forget about the devil. That's what the devil wants.
Yes.
Because then if you forget about him, he has us where he wants us. He
Okay.
can do what he likes with us. But however, sin is still there, of course. And of course, there's still little offences that would be venial, easily pardonable, that's what that meant. And then serious sin, of course, would be something grave, something serious. It was called mortal because from the word death, it killed the soul, it killed the life of grace in the soul, of course, and it still does. But there's more emphasis on love, not fear of God, and we do things out of love for our neighbour because to love God with all our heart and all our soul, and all our mind, with our whole strength, and then, and our neighbour as ourselves, okay? So that is the basis now. Love, be positive, be constructive, and so the more we have love and the more grace we have, of course, then sin diminishes. It's pushed out of our lives,
I see, and that surely is an important shift in emphasis, especially away from fear to actually caring. What about good and doing good? Does that come into it?
Oh yes, of course. Helping people, again, if we mustn't lose sight of the basic principle, I've come that you may have life and life to the full, life in all its aspects, and to try and be humanly 100%. That's the important thing. That's what Christ wishes us to be, be 100% human, fully human. Himself was fully human as well as fully divine, and of course we are expected to follow in that road. But you asked me, what question did you ask there again?
Well, basically, I was just going to move on to another guideline along those lines as well in relation to doing good. That it's not just enough to be avoiding sin, that also there's a requirement to...
doing good, of course, covers a multitude because, we can quote Matthew 25,
Yes.
Relieving hunger and everything in the world, poverty, of course, and being Catholics, not Catholic by name, but Catholic in action.
Yes.
And that's what it means to go out and help everybody, not turn our back on anybody, and to do our best like that for the people. And we try to do that with the help of God's grace, of course, and we keep going and love God with all our heart and our soul and our mind and our neighbour as ourselves. And there's no good in saying that, or I believe that. There's no good in saying I believe. Believe won't save us, Big deal if you say I believe. Satan believes. But of course, because he exists,
Yes.
but he must believe in somebody there, a power greater than himself, of course, which we all believe, and that there's a God. But we must put that belief into action by our works. And St. James says, as the body without the spirit is dead, faith without
good works. Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think there's. I had it here because we discussed it the last day at our discussions pre this program. That in Matthew 25 it says, "For I was hungry and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." Now, in looking at the type of work you have been doing, I think you have ticked all those boxes, even though I don't like that phrase, but you have been doing all those things either in the parish or in the additional work. So your life in the parish, of course, is multifaceted, taking in schools, hospitals, prisons, preparation for the Sacraments, etc. So perhaps you would just tell me a little bit more about what you had to do in the schools. You've already outlined the general education system, the 11 plus, etc. But what involvement did you have directly with the schools?
Well, you would go into the school and be there for the people, and of course be there for, say, in the old days, you just was there to say mass for them, you see, and then you were there to hear confessions and so on. But as well as that, you see, in a Catholic school, which we had, of course, in every parish, you would depend and trust the teachers, Catholic teachers, put across the religion, the
message,
REs, we say, religious education, you see, and then they would prepare them and bring them up to a point. We'd say, if we were going to say mass for the children in the school, you would say, well, tell them about it as simple as you can, and then we will go in when everything was ready, you see, and we would say the mass for them, you see, make it more meaningful for them, you see, and the same applied to the sacraments then, you see, preparing the sacraments for the sacraments. That was done, that was a joint effort, teamwork, parish, parents and school, You just didn't leave it all to the school. And it's very important, in England anyway, especially, to have catechists. They are kept in a lot. They came in a lot after Vatican in the mid-60s and early 70s. They came in a lot, and they're very much appreciated now, and they work quite a lot in the schools and so on, and preparing the children for the sacraments, In baptism, well, you would get a few catechists to help you, to take you, and you would have maybe a few parents coming in and explain what it's all about. Because it's important that in baptism, that's the first sacrament, that's the foundation. But nobody lays the foundation and walks away and expects the house to grow itself. If you're building a house, you build on the foundation, and that's the importance of the other sacraments. Because you're not a fully fledged Christian until you're confirmed. Because confirmation completes the sacrament of baptism, you see, and then you're nourished with the bread of life, of course, as well. And all these preparations for the sacraments, they're done, not just the school, not just the priest, not just the parish, but the parish, catechist, school, and priest.
Okay, now you would be dealing with an aspect of baptism there, or conversion, in the sense that you would from time to time be involved in people who were converting to be Catholics, and would you just elaborate a little bit on that, when they would be initiated into the church, and what program they would have to do?
Well, in England, of course, we have this great system called the RCIA. It started in the States, actually. It began in the States some years ago, after Vatican II again. RCIA, those letters mean the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. But we simplify it and say the journey of faith. We're on a journey of faith from birth until we leave this world, you see. We're on a journey, and we're learning all the time. And, it isn't so much learning as experiencing life, and listening to other people, their witness to the faith, and that helps us all a lot. So we had this thing going on in the parish, if people wanted to become Catholics. Now, there were different types of people who would want to become Catholics. They'd want to be, as we say, fully received into the church. Some of them might be baptized already, Anglicans.
Yes.
Right? And because of ecumenism and the closeness of the churches, we would accept that baptism, you see, as valid. And then they would come along, start in September maybe, and come along weekly to a course of talks. And what we would do is go through briefly the old, set up on the catechism, the creed, the sacraments, and so on like that, and prayer, which is very important. And, then at about Easter, there are different stages in this journey of faith, or the RCIA course. Different stages. You would receive them first into the church. You would kind of, they'd have the first part would be, the first step, if you like, would be learning, they would come forward and commit themselves, that they were going to continue on. There was no guarantee that they would be Catholics by the time Easter came, because it was on Holy Saturday night, the night before Easter Sunday, they'd be received into the church, fully into the church, to full communion. It was called full communion with the church, because as they say, they were already baptized. Then they would be confirmed and received officially into the church, you see. And that would be the reception into the church, and there was a ceremony for that as well, you see. And they'd be Catholics after that. But they had to go on again after Easter, and learn more about topping up, if we're topping up with the knowledge and the witness that I already mentioned about, about the Catholic faith, and then they would also be helped in that journey of faith by a sponsor who would stand by them and maybe go home after the talk, and they could ask,
Yes.
confide in that person and say, what did he mean or what did she mean when they said so and so, you see.
Okay.
A sponsor to help
So that
journey, a chaperone to help them along in their journey.
So, Father Pat, from what you have outlined in that and in regard to the preparation for the sacraments, there clearly is a great involvement of the laity, perhaps greater than there is in Ireland at the present time.
There would be, because we, in England, of course, with the majority of people, non-Catholic, so to speak, where here is the opposite, but we have this way of introducing them to the church, to receive them full communion. Actually, if they weren't baptized, that might be in somebody's mind, if they weren't baptized already, Anglican or Methodist, they'd need to be baptized then too. They'd be prepared, you see, in that course, in that RCIA course. They'd be prepared. They would be baptized on Holy Saturday night,
Yes. Now, that deals with that part of it, the conversions and the baptisms and the sacraments, but there's other work, of course, as outlined in Matthew 25:35, and one of those is prisons. And what type of involvement, in what way would you have been involved? I know it's only peripherally in helping prisoners.
Well, personally, I was never involved. I was never in a parish where there was a prison, but I know priests who were, and they would go in and say mass to the people, and meet the people like that, But then, but we do have very much. We're concerned very much the prison, because there are, I suppose, 3 or 4 prisons in the diocese, and so and the priest there would be going as like any officer, and he'd have his keys in order. Of course, you have to be vetted, you see,
yes,
when you go in, and he would go in and help them all and talk to them, I suppose. And I wouldn't know in detail what the priest did, because I wasn't involved, as I say. I wasn't concerned directly with a prison like that. But with prisoners, we have Prisoners Sunday,
yes,
always. It fell in November, I think, and we had a collection for all those who work in prisons, chaplains, and for dependents of prisoners,
yes,
and we do can remember them in our prayers, of course. And of course, we pray very much for the prisoners and their dependents in our bidding prayers of the Mass, and so on. So that would be the work there. Coming back again, maybe I didn't
yes,
deal properly with that in the secondary schools. The ages between the ages of 11 and 18. Again, because of the shortage of priests, the bishop couldn't have a full-time chaplain to schools,
yes.
So the priest in the parish, in whose parish it was, they would go, or maybe there might be 9 or 10 parishes feeding into a comprehensive school year, and each priest would go in and take a year, or be responsible for a year, and follow that up the house,
Okay.
From which they went in first year, second, third, fourth year, and by the time you come to 6th year, that final year, you would probably get to know quite a number of them,
Very
and there
good.
what you would do there is, you would help. My first years, when I was a parish priest, I had to go in myself and be chaplain, Well,
Yes.
that I used to put Friday, Thursday aside. I'd go in the morning, say Mass at 8:30, and that the pupils and the staff, if they wanted to come to that Mass, then they'd go in again at about 12 o'clock in the day, when it was break time, lunchtime.
Lunchtime, yes.
And I'd mix it with them in the yard, and I'd have my lunch there with them, you see.
Yes.
Be seen to be there, and
Yes.
just let them see, that the priest is human, he's there to help, And I was available for about maybe half an hour for consultation, or I'd have an office and or confessions, see. Then I would also lay aside, would say, I'd go in on a holiday to say Mass, because the children were still in school on the holiday, the pupils, and I would try and have a penitential service where the other priest would come in, and we'd have a penitential service once a term, you see.
Can I ask you, just on that age group, because you have a great youth club in your area, perhaps the youth club isn't even enough, because you have a youth village and the youth
there's a big
missionary
youth-
movement.
There's a big youth village in the diocese,
Yes.
and it was run by actually Father Donnelly. For the last 20 years now, he's been, he was a young priest. In fact, his brother is the famous partner to Ant and Dick, on the television.
On BBC,
BBC and ITV, and but he is still the chaplain, even though he's dean now in the cathedral himself. There was the bishop there a few years back, Bishop Ambrose, a Benedictine bishop, and his idea was, and his aim was, to build a youth village, which cost about £1 million, and it got off the ground anyway. So it's great now, where there's a team there that drawn from all over the world, youth, because the idea was youth instruct youth teach youth, and so on, and that people like bigots like, so there might be from Australia, might be 1 or 2, America, and they stay for about a year or 2 in the youth village, and they're trained and they're equipped to go out to secondary schools to bring missions, to have retreats there, and primary schools as well. And then the primary schools and the children and from all the Catholic schools in the diocese, they would go to that village maybe over the whole course of a week. There could be thousands of them there,
Yes.
and they would stay in the chalets. There are chalets there, you see, and there's, en suite rooms and everything, you see. And adults go there too. On retreat as well, you see, because I hope to be going there later on the year for a priest retreat, to this youth village. It's lovely. It's out in the country, in a very kind of healthy place, atmosphere, and so it's there for the youth, and it's doing a tremendous work for the youth in the diocese, and okay, they might be careless about church and all the rest, but at least they're drawn into this, idea of that art isn't kind of, you don't get full satisfaction from doing mundane or secular things. There's something else in the world,
Yes.
Beside that, you see, there's the spiritual input in the world that they all need to know about, the work of the Spirit,
Yes.
and so on. So that's there for them, that youth. In every parish too, there's, priests would try to have a youth club.
Yes.
In my last parish that I was in before I retired in 2006, there was an ecumenical youth club.
Yes.
And in fact, it was on the Methodist premises. I happened to be the president of it, The vicars would come in, and we would have different denominations helping the youth club, tuck shop, leading with football and so on like that, tennis and so on. And so that was called the Ecumenical Youth Club. All this has come about since the Vatican II Council, of course, ecumenism,
Yeah.
So we would always try to do our best for the youth, and I since I was ordained anyway, that was my priority. Well, one of them anyway, is to try and encourage the youth, because they're the people of the church of tomorrow,
Yes. Okay, so we've touched on the sacraments, the baptism, the parish work, the mass, the youth, and the hospitals and the prisons. Now, what about the hungry? What happens in your diocese for the people who are hungry?
Yeah, that would be, I suppose we're speaking here, of course, of those abroad,
Yes.
the third world. Now, of course, in every parish, first of all at home, we have to see after the people at home. It's all part of life to the full, seeing to their needs, physical and spiritual. And so if there were people badly off in the parish, there's the Great St. Vincent de Paul Society, which you know about.
Yes.
And they would. There's nearly a society in every parish in the diocese, in the country. So that's doing tremendous work. But now it may not be as necessary as what it was in the old days, because in England you have social services. You can get everything that the state will be able to help. Now that doesn't mean that the SVP is obsolete. No, it's still needed there to go out to people, to visit them in their homes and so on, and to counteract loneliness, for example.
Right.
See, that's another form of hunger, poverty. And so they would talk to them, they would bring them the news sheet, the newsletter and so on, and keep contact is the important thing. Communicate with the people, all the time. Then abroad, well, we have a big thing going in England, CAFOD, the CAFOD, the Catholic Fund for Overseas Development, and there's collection, well, not as such a collection, but there's probably a CAFOD box in every church that people always chip in, as they pass along, like the SVP box and so on. And So they would pay in there, and then maybe once or twice a year we'd have it's called Family Fast Day. No, Family Fast Day, one Friday in Lent, right?
Very good.
And one in October, you see,
Mm-hmm.
and, two in the year. And the idea was that you would fast and give up something, and try to relate, identify with those who are hungry in the third world, and the money you would save on food or drink or entertainment, or smoking as the case may be, you would put in an envelope, bring it in, and you might have a bumper, collection that weekend. You'd have the Sunday, then following the Friday, you would have that, and you could no bother get about £1,000, where it would say an average collection a week might be 500 or 600.
Yes.
You would get up to £1,000. I used to try and aim at that. Get £1,000
Mm-hmm.
isn't enough to CAFOD.
Yeah.
And of course, CAFOD is a great charity because you have like Christian Aid, you have different things. But there's one thing about CAFOD: they spend very little. The expense is very little on admin.
Admin.
And
Okay.
it goes straight to the people in need.
Yes.
That's the big thing for the third world. So we do try to put the principles of the gospel into practice,
Yeah.
I was hungry, you gave me to eat, thirsty, you gave me to drink, and so on and so on and so forth, And it's not just the soul, we always think the body as well, because you can't preach to empty bellies.
Yes. Excellent, and that it's really, really, really interesting. And as I said, you seem to be in your church and in your parish meeting all of the requirements as laid down in the gospel. And the reason I mentioned earlier about saying about the emphasis being on sin previously, and you're quite right, of course, sin still exists, but that the emphasis now is more on, as you said, ensuring that people have life and have it to the full, also building a kingdom of good.
Exactly.
I think the last day when I mentioned that, you said if you put an extra O in the kingdom of God, you have the kingdom of good. And this is what you're doing effectively, is building a kingdom where people are working for good, for their own good and for each other and for the good of people far away. Exactly. So that's really great. As part of your work, of course, you are in a position of significant authority yourself as parish priest, but you're also just one section or one cog in a greater machine, namely the Catholic Church, which is doing all of these things. Now, you mentioned the last day a few statements which I thought were worthy of note, and one of them was baptism doesn't make you a Catholic. Will you explain that, please? I know what you mean.
I touched on that already. That
yes, a bit, yes.
You don't, it's only the foundation.
Correct.
Of becoming a Catholic. It only gives you a name, a label. And of course, the thing about it is this, that if you draw the parallel with a house, you don't lay a foundation and walk away and hope the house to grow. The other sacraments are there to nourish and to to build the rest of the house, the walls and the roof and everything. The other sacraments do that. You see, and of course, children themselves, they're helpless really. They all need the protection and the guidance of their parents. You see, and they must get the lead from the parents. And in England, this is very important, really. Because and we explain this to them when they're getting instructions on baptism. You spend time with the parents to emphasise that this is important. You just can't leave the child to fend for itself the same as you can expect it to grow up and eat and drink. And supply itself with food and so on, and nourishment. You need the parents to do that. So it's also important in the spiritual life.
You
need the parents to give the lead there and help.
So the need for faith and action. Another thing you touched on the last day was that sometimes it seems to be necessary that people have to suffer for the faith. Now there's the other suffering as well, suffering and sickness, but first of all, would you deal with suffering for the faith? Because at this point in time, there's a greater persecution than any other time in history where Christians are being persecuted. Indeed, Christians are being beheaded and in some instances are being crucified on crosses. Would you care to elaborate on that, please?
That would be the extreme, of course.
Sure.
Christ himself was crucified and suffered for us the great sacrifice to the Father on our behalf. He offered the great sacrifice on the cross. But in a smaller way, as Christ said, if you want to be a follower of mine, you must take up your cross daily and follow me. that means take the rough with the smooth, take it on the chin,
Yes.
you know, and cut out the grumbling, so to speak, you know. Get rid of grumbling and complaining, because it's part and parcel of human nature to complain, I suppose, and grumble, you know. And we must be kind of outgoing to people and say that, take it off for the sake of Christ, you know.
Okay.
We're people of the Spirit. We're full. Christ has left us His Spirit now to help us on our road, on our own journey of faith, you see. And we have to just take this happily and be joyful about it. And the faith is something joyful, you know. I think as Pope Francis has said in one of his letters, you know, that be happy that the people see we've got something special. We've got Christ in us.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and be happy and joyful. Don't be like people with long faces coming from a funeral.
Yes, yeah.
But of course, a funeral too is a joyful occasion for us because we believe in the resurrection. It's not the end. You see, people who are very worldly minded, they don't talk of death, you know. And this is common in England. They say, he passed away.
Yes.
You know, whisper, he passed away. Passed where? I was going to say, I've often attempted to say, what do you mean?
Okay.
They say, death is inevitable. It's part and parcel of our growing up, you know, because we must go through that doorway before we come to eternal life, life to the full. And it's only when we go to our eternal life that we have life to the full, you know.
Okay.
And suffering, of course, suffering is taking the weather, the little bits and pieces, pains and aches, you know, take it cheerfully. But I mean, that's why you have doctors and all there too, to help us physically. They're guided by the Spirit too, to come in the right medicine and to help us on our journey through life, you know.
Okay.
Now, it's all a combined effort.
Suffering as distinct from suffering for the faith, and you did touch partly on it, suffering in sickness and suffering of disability or falling on accident and that. Sometimes people ask a question, why does God let this happen? Surely suffering has to have a purpose, I suppose, otherwise it wouldn't be there. But would you perhaps address the question?
It's difficult.
Why does God let that happen?
Suffering actually is a mystery. It's just like, for example, people committing suicide and so on, you know, and take their own lives. They say, why? Well, it's still a mystery. No, we'll never know fully the answer until we get to heaven and find out for ourselves, you know. And it's all because we are all children of our first parents and the original sin. That wasn't taken away. That's taken away in baptism. I know what the sin is, but the proneness to evil is there, and the suffering is always with us as we go through life, you know, because we're all going along step by step to rid ourselves of all suffering, and suffering in the body, suffering in the soul is sin, you know, evil, and so on. That's all a part of suffering. But God doesn't wish us to suffer. It's part of growing up, part of human nature.
Part of life,
you know, but He allows it to happen, and it strengthens us too, and it makes us better people. You know, it strengthens our will. You know, and it helps us tremendously in that way.
Okay, now some helpful attributes for a priest, and you have been a priest for a long time and served for a long time, 53 years. How important, for example, are the words of the Beatitudes to the life of a priest, and which ones would you find in particular helpful to you as a priest?
Well, all the Beatitudes are important, and I pray every day and I pray for others that they put the Beatitudes into practice. You see, that the icing and the cake, so to speak.
Okay.
We all keep the commandments. We should keep the commandments to the best of our ability, and try to be better people. I have a great phrase always: God loves a good trier.
Yes.
You know, and how true. But I mean, we keep the commandments, but over and above that, we have the Beatitudes, the topping up the icing and the cake, so to speak. You know, blessed are the poor in spirit. Those who are poor in spirit, who don't wish to carry anything. Well, we can't take anything with us, you know. But you could be a millionaire and still be poor in spirit, you know, but get our priorities right, you know. We can't take anything with us. I often say to people, the man who said, "Oh, that's all balderdash. When I die, I want my money buried with me." So the son's very. They carried out his wishes to the letter. When he died, they put a check into the coffin.
Yes, very good. And he could cash it wherever he could, yes.
It probably
Now,
bounced a few times.
you also mentioned that a helpful practice for a priest, you said that prayer is the basis of the priestly
It's the
life.
basis of the Mass, sacraments, and we say the divine office every day takes about an hour, but we can break it up, like, There's there's office of readings, there's morning prayer, there's afternoon prayer, there's evening prayer, there's night prayer, but you can fit that into as the day goes on, but it takes about an hour and all, roughly. That's not very much. And
Yes.
then there's time for spiritual reading. We have to give time to spiritual reading, time to meditation, and so on, you see. But
This is every day.
Yeah, our whole life, revolves around prayer. And if we're not people of prayer, well, anything can happen. We're open to temptation. Everybody's open to temptation, and so on like that. But we get the grace we need then to keep going and to overcome all these things, all the temptations in the world, to fight them and so on with prayer. And we're on the watch always. You see, we're always, and it's good too, even for lay people, to waste time with God. That means to give up what you're doing and go on retreat.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
pray. Prayer is so important.
Yeah. That brings me then to touch very briefly on your family home as a young lad growing up in Clonavrick.
Yes.
And the importance perhaps of prayer there. What ingredients were in your family home that you think helped to formulate your vocation?
I think as growing up, I think we didn't we took it for granted too, obviously, because it was like the air you breathe.
Okay.
You can't do without it, but still it's there, and you have to have it. Prayer, family rosary. Parents there telling you even what prayers to say in the morning and the evening, and of course night prayer, and of course this was sort of reinforced in school. Then you see in the Catholic schools, the way our teachers, and especially in the primary school and the national school in Roisin.
Yes.
And then as we went to the brothers, I think the brothers did a tremendous job. The sacrifice they make, and the late teachers as well that we had in De La Salle, and all this influenced me in making up my mind. See, you might ask me the question, you probably will, why did I decide to become a priest, or how did I decide to become a priest? It's still a mystery, a lot of it, but a lot of contributory factors, prayer, I suppose, Catholic atmosphere, Catholic home, Catholic education, exam for people, the community in the parish, the parish community. It is from the community and from the family that we get vocations, and a prayerful community, and regular at Mass and the Sacraments and so on. All these things work in their own way, And
Yes.
then it was always that, I suppose, my vocation. I'm committed to that now, my vocation. But you kind of push it in the back of your mind, You say,
Yes.
I want, and it took me a long time to decide. So I was about 19, I say, when I fully decided, it come into your mind, and then you get rid of it. The thought of becoming a priest, and then something else will strike you, something else happens, and then, that again, you see, so there was more than one contributory factor.
Okay.
You see, in becoming a priest.
Yes,
So,
and naturally, anybody who becomes a priest, it doesn't happen without making sacrifice. The sacrifice
right,
of
yeah.
giving up a lot of other things.
And material comforts, yes, and so on.
Yes.
And the comfort of a nice young girl, and
Yes.
and so on like that. That's the sacrifice too, you see.
Yes, indeed,
And
yeah.
you'll give your whole life to God.
Yes.
And you see, we have people often ask me when I'm talking to them, especially non-Catholic, marrying a Catholic, about why do we don't marry or something like that. And I say, well, you have a sacrifice to make too. You have to see to your family, your wife and family, or your husband and family, as the case may be. That's a heck of a lot. Responsibility. We all have responsibilities, And it is a sacrifice to give up these comforts and pleasures, of course. And we hope that we'll have a reward,
Yes.
And you're not tied down as much either, you see. We put marriage in such a high pedestal. Marriage between man and woman, by the way, that's the only type of people who can label marriage, man and woman, right? So anyway, whatever people think, whatever they say, never mind. But anyway, what happened recently in this country, I just refer to it now, was tolerance, false tolerance. Anyway, but the tolerance for people, irrespective of how they're born, how they grow up, and so on like that, they can't help that. That's part of their, metabolism, is part of their makeup. However, coming back to the vocation side of it and to the sacrifices, I say that marriage, we put it on such a high pedestal, the church does. That's a full-time job.
Okay, so you, in other words, you have no regrets
No,
for the sacrifices you made. Yeah,
In fact,
okay.
I look sometimes with a certain amount of consideration and great respect for the vicars who are married. You see, they are torn because their wife comes first in their family and they won't have the same time.
I understand.
For people, for their parishioners,
I understand.
But they do a great job too,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned joy earlier on, and we're very in the end now. But you're a man of a joyful disposition yourself. I think you bring joy and humour with you, and
so we have to be joyful and happy.
It ties in with the biblical phrase, rejoice and be glad. Good. So I'm sure you're glad that we're nearing the end of this interview. Well, I'm glad you came because you are on holiday and as you say, you came in your casuals and we appreciate your time. Is there anything that you would just like to add, anything in particular that you maybe would have liked me to ask, or anything that overall, key words or message you want to add before we conclude?
Well, actually, I think we have covered everything pretty well, but obviously there'll be something I'll be thinking of. I forgot to mention there too that as well as I'm still in a diocesan capacity, even though I'm finished with parish work, as such, an active parish priest, I'm still chaplain to the Catholic Women's League in the diocese. Now, there's a section, they call it a section in each parish. I suppose there's a section still in half the parishes. They were wanted more in the past, I suppose, if you like, in the early days, especially before Vatican II, because you didn't have all the different organisations springing up, in parishes, lay participation. But they were wanted then, we'd say, for doing whatever the priest expected them to do. And of course, the faith too, the Catholics, were on a more defensive kind of platform, you see, where we were kind of sticking together, because in case of, for want of a better word, contamination, or be kind of influenced by other religions, which were supposed to be all false, like Anglicans, Methodists and so on and so forth, I'm not talking about paganism, of course, that's a different thing.
That would be a bit pre-Vatican II outlook, I think,
yes. And you see,
pre-ecumenism, yes.
It was then the Catholic Women's League took off in the early part of the 20th century, and so it was for us to appreciate our faith and stick together, because there's always the danger of falling away. That's why we had to take all the precautions in a mixed marriage, a marriage between a Catholic and a non-Catholic. That the Catholic, first of all, that the Catholic wouldn't lose or get careless about his faith or her faith. And of course, if the Catholic practice their faith and witness to the love of God, and which they should, of course, was they do the proper thing, they would influence the partner. And that partner would eventually become a Catholic too, maybe, But so really, so this Catholic Women's League is still there, the Catholic Women's League, which involves me a quarterly meeting, maybe, with the officers. And
AGMs and that?
Yes. AGM in any part of the country, it could be England or Wales, because that's the hierarchy consists of England and Wales.
Yeah.
And for a few days every year. And then an AGM, that would be for the country, national, but then for the parish, you'd have an AGM too, of course, and you'd have meetings every quarter, roughly, and a social, and a pilgrimage or a retreat day, like that. So I'm there for over 20 years now. I've been chaplain for the CWL.
Yes.
The CWL is called the Catholic
Women's League. Yeah.
But so that was another thing I wanted to throw in there for good measure.
Okay.
Many priests now have extra jobs like that, at on top of their parish work, which seem to really keep you fully occupied.
Indeed, I can see that you were fully occupied, and you're still a man that's much in demand. And
I'm still trying to give my hand in.
Absolutely, indeed, and it's great that you have the health and the ability and the agility to do it. So, Father
Pat, I want to thank you, as you said before. Okay. Anything I wanted to add, as I said before, I hope that this little interview will help others, in their search for a vocation in life. And we are always looking for vocations, but I would say to parents that if they see any kind of a desire in a person, in a son or in a daughter, as the case may be, for this drawing to God in a special way, to serve God in a special way, it should be encouraged.
Okay.
On the other hand, the opposite side is, the other side of the end of the line is, don't force anybody,
Yes.
That would be wrong too, you see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Father Pat, I congratulate you on your 53 years as a priest.
Thank you.
As I said, you bring joy with you. You have a joyful disposition. You have worked diligently and comprehensively to do, as you said at the outset, to ensure that people have life and have it to the full. So we think that you have helped to bring happiness and goodness to the lives of many, and in our opinion, your story is a story that should be told, and we thank you for telling it to us.
Thank you.
Father Pat,
Thank you, Con.
good a míle maithagad.
And thank you for giving up your time as well.
Thank you so much indeed.
And for giving up your time, because you're retired like me, but you're still doing the sort of the goodness of your heart.
It's just change of emphasis, like the.
You'll help us out for other people to have life and have it to the full.
Hopefully.
That's the purpose of life, isn't it? That's
Absolutely.
why Christ came at all. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's all about being happy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father Pat.
And
indeed.
thanks to Dan Joe.
Of course, thank you to Dan Joe also.
The man behind the scenes, the man behind it all.